I believe we have saved the best to last. We have with us Dr. Shirley McCune, who will talk about restructuring of schools. Dr. McCune is a native of Colorado. She's been a classroom teacher, a university faculty member, an educational researcher, an education association manager, and a federal executive. Her interests have included community development, educational equity, and restructuring education to meet the needs of our information society. She currently is a director, senior director with the Mid-Continental Regional Lab, and provides great assistance to schools in our region and to state departments. She's received numerous degrees. She's worked with the National Education Association, the U.S. Department of Education, and the Chief State School Officers. She worked with our State Department in terms of developing our strategic direction, Kansas Schools for the 21st Century. If you hadn't had a chance to look at that, please do. Very honestly, it is my belief that our State Department of Education and education in Kansas would not be where it is today without the continued help of Dr. McCune. She has worked for years with the department, and we find her as one of our most valuable assets.
It seems to me that far too much of our efforts have been focused on the issue of let's find a short-term fix and fix up these schools and taking care of them, rather than the issue of understanding that what we're into is a total restructuring of the society. What is happening in America today and what is happening in Kansas and the Great Plains is not simply a chance situation in the usual winds of change. What it amounts to is a total transformation of our society. We have moved into a new era. That era we talk about as the information society, and we've already gone through a couple phases of it. But what I'm not sure that we have really begun to comprehend or to act on sufficiently is the incredible amount of organizational restructuring and human resource development restructuring. The whole ballgame in this particular changed society is that there's only two things that really matter. One of those is the information capital that we can put together and our ability to use information to produce products and to produce new ideas and new information. And secondly, to produce human capital. Schools have always had two tough things to do in society. One of those things is to conserve the past and to take the knowledge of past generations and move it ahead so that our children, in fact, can know what has happened in the past and that we can conserve the advancements that our society has already made to a certain date. That's the conserving functions of schools, and in a way we do very well at that. We in fact provide more facts for our kids. We in fact help them to understand the past, and we deal with that fairly well. The other function of schools, which sounds paradoxical and yet in a sense is really not, is the fact that we have to prepare students not for today's society, but for a society that's 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road. And so we have to anticipate what the future is and then move back and figure out what it is we need to do today. That's called anticipatory socialization, or the social change function of schools. During the past 10 years, we've been going through a reform movement. And that reform movement began with the governors of the nation, and basically what their concern was that they began to understand the very close relationship between economic development and human capital. And it may be easy to say, well, if it isn't broke, why fix it? Why should we try to deal with that? And unfortunately, what I would say to you is that while the system still continues to work for some parts of the population, it isn't going to work over the long run. And what has to happen at conferences like this and throughout other dialogues that go on in the state is a commitment of understanding that what we have to be about is building a future. It is the future that motivates us. It's not what we're doing now. You have to understand the breadth of the task that's before us. You cannot begin to think about restructuring of education without understanding that our total society is in a crisis of restructuring, and you can't get away from it. You can't go into rural areas, you can't go into churches, you can't go into government, you can't go into business and hide from the fact that what we are facing is a total restructuring of the society. First of all, we have to understand that we're in a new economy. And Kansas has made some turnaround in its economy, but it's still in a precarious situation in parts of the state. And I don't think you should rest on the fact that things will remain as they are, because they will not. If anything, we know the next 5 years will be the most chaotic of our lives. And if you talk to businessmen today, the great majority of them understand the critical importance of human resource development. One of the things that is going to be a major challenge to America's citizens is the fact that increasingly our society is becoming older. And so that what we begin to see is that 80% of the wealth in America today is held by people 50 and over. And of that particular group, that wealth is going to have to be invested in future generations. It's the fact that 30% of every district's children are either physically, emotionally, or sexually abused. And so when we begin to look at a society that allows 30% of the children in its country to be abused, it seems to me we really have some questions to ask ourselves about the quality of adults that we have. Oftentimes people say things to me about, well, we're spending more on schools and we're getting less. And I disagree with that totally. We're spending more on schools, but what we're also doing is taking on more and more in schools. And that will be a trend that will continue. We're not only feeding kids at noon, we're feeding them in the morning. We, in fact, are providing more psychological services. We're providing special ed services. And more, the school is the hub or the center of all human resource development services in the school. We have to have better people in this society. Not only do we have to grow better kids that can function at higher physical, intellectual, and social levels, but we have to have adults who can be leaders who can, in fact, have visions of where we could go in the future. Curriculum is not simply putting some facts in kids' minds, and it isn't teaching them the past history of the world. While that's important, what we have to deal with, we have to continue to deal with their basic skills and their understanding of the past. But we also have to prepare them with the range of knowledge and skills that they're going to need for their personal psychological well-being, their self-esteem, their ethics, their ability to give and care to others, with group and organizational skills, leadership skills, conflict resolution skills, working with people who are different than they are. We're going to have to provide them with career development skills. All of those are clearly part of what has to be a part of the curriculum. Parenthetically, if you want to be worried about a school, be worried about a classroom where it's quiet. Because one of the things that we know about learning is that the only way we learn to think is when we are talking to others or when we are writing. And when you see rows and rows of kids sitting in bolted down desks in a quiet classroom, be very worried, because what I can assure you is they may be learning some facts, but they are not learning how to think and how to process information. We also need to restructure our curriculum. What the revolution has been in curriculum is that we no longer are teaching facts to children. It is almost impossible for us to guess the kinds of facts that they will need. That basically we are still measuring the output of schools by national tests, which measure nothing but factual recall. And the issue for most children and the issues for the society is that what has changed in education today is that we no longer see the teaching of facts and information as the primary outcome of education. We use facts, and we use changing facts in a variety of ways to teach them information processing. And the reason for that is that none of us can guess what it is they're going to need in the future. We also must provide more individualized and learner-directed learning. We have to understand that the only way that anyone ever learns is from their own frame of reference, and that all learning begins with the affective parts of life. Lifelong learning in the community and in the staff. One of the developments that's going on in more and more communities in this nation is that in Phoenix, Arizona, and I think that's the first place it's happened, we now have the mayor of the city who has an educator whose job is to work with the social welfare community and put together a total network of human resource development activities in that community where we can actually provide for all of the needs of the children and of the adults in that community. What we know is that the earlier we intervene into the lives of people, the cheaper it is. What I would hope this state would do would be to undertake a series of demonstration projects to build learning communities in some rural areas where we're serving all ages, where we begin to demonstrate what can happen when we put people together and when we deal with them in a holistic fashion, and to begin to demonstrate schools of the future and to encourage the creativity that we need.
I'm just very, very pleased and honored, Governor, that you